So good morning, everybody. My name is Chuck Tyree. Many of you probably already know me, but Supervisor of Public Safety Programs. One of the programs I oversee is GIVE, and part of the planning committee for this event. So hopefully everybody's enjoying themselves and learning, and going to hopefully take some of what you learn over there the next, well, since yesterday until tomorrow, back with you to your agency. So I'm excited about this next presentation. We have Lieutenant Jason Bruder with us from Charleston, South Carolina. I just want to give you a little bit background. First of all, the full description of the presentation is in your programs, and his full bio is also in your program as well. But I just wanted to give you a little background. How many GIVE agency representatives do we have in the room? Just raise your hand real quick. So a few. There's a few non-GIVE agencies. So last year, beginning with GIVE 5, we actually developed, along with our research folks at DCJS, an instrument we call the self-assessment tool. I know it probably gives some of you angst, even me mentioning that word. But it actually was our way of trying to take the evidence-based strategies that are required for participation in GIVE and give all the jurisdictions a consistent way to look at the work that they're doing locally. And previously, our work plans that we had developed for GIVE were inconsistent, didn't really capture the true essence for us of what was happening on the local level as far as the implementation of evidence-based strategies. So we developed these things, and they're really concise, I think, no more than 10 key elements for each one of the evidence-based strategies. I don't want to get into too much detail, but it gives you really the foundational components of each one of the evidence-based strategies that need to be present if you're going to really implement these things to fidelity, is a big research term, to really the foundation of each one of them. So we developed these things. After that, we became aware that NIJ actually had developed a self-assessment tool to help the jurisdictions, actually nationwide, look at their capacity to implement evidence-based policing. You know, when we're talking about this is evidence-based policing kind of 101, I think a really crucial step in that is looking at your capacity to do it. What is necessary? What needs to be there organizationally, procedurally, policy-wise, et cetera, in order for you actually to do this evidence-based work. So we became aware, I'm very familiar with the NIJ LEADS program, Law Enforcement Advancing Data and Science, LEADS. And we became aware of this tool, and we said this is a really good way of jurisdictions who are really just looking to start out or even in the beginning phases of implementing or trying to implement evidence-based work, looking at it, giving it to them to say, this is something you should go through to assess your own capabilities to do it. So Jason, as a lieutenant in Charleston, has used this and also has been very instrumental in the work that has gone on in Charleston as far as evidence-based policing. So I'm really glad that he was able to be here today. A quick little story. Was it about a month ago or so? About a month ago, I called Jason to just confirm some of the kind of logistics for the symposium. I call him and I'm like, hey, you got a minute? And he's like, well, I'm kind of dealing with a hurricane right now. And so I was like, oh, I should really I should have some better situational awareness. They were getting a hurricane, I forget which one, but right at Charleston, and literally that day. So I was like, okay, why don't you just give me a call back after this whole thing? Be safe, brother, and so on. But I'm really glad that Lieutenant Bruder is able to join us today. So I'm going to turn it over to him and just encourage you all to pay attention, make some notes, and be ready for questions at the end. So thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck. Can everybody hear me? Is that okay? I'm not a big mic guy. I'm not a podium guy. But thank y'all for having me here. Chuck kind of introduced it there. Obviously, a little bit about me, aside from what Chuck said there. Currently, I'm the Chief of Staff. Before that, I was a patrol commander for Charleston. just because I would guess most people aren't aware of where Charleston is, maybe, other than now on the coast from the hurricane story. We're the largest municipal agency in the state of South Carolina. We have 450 allocated, and like most people, we're roughly about 10% short right now. But we have 450 sworn officers, and like he mentioned, I am a lead scholar. Before that, we were actually a leads agency, the city was. So that's where we kind of started this ball rolling here as far as a self-assessment tool. A little bit of my background, I actually got my master's degree from Long Island University, but it was completely online, so this is only my second time ever to the state of New York. And a computer science degree before that. So a little bit of my background at the department and kind of where we were. 10 years ago, we were still handwriting reports. So in the last 10 years, we've moved to a mobile field reporting system where we could actually do the things in the field. And we've kind of fast forward all the way up that to where everybody has body-worn cameras. So the technology over the last 10 years at our department has, fast forward version is how we've gotten there. So, we took the leads assessment tool, and I was sitting here when they called me to talk about this. I was like, why are they having this guy from South Carolina come up to talk about for an hour about a tool that on the cover says should take no more than 15 minutes? I was like, well, what am I going to talk about? And I was like, they want me to talk about all the things I've screwed up, all the mistakes I've made, and so y'all don't have to repeat those. So as we go through this today, don't be afraid to ask questions. I don't want this to be much more of a discussion because I can tell you how to fill out a form in probably about 30 seconds, but that's not what it's about today. So one of the things with talking about EBP is I don't really know where everybody's at. Does everybody, as far as understanding EBP and those types of things, how many analysts do we have in the room? Okay, 2. How many academic doctor, professor types? Yes. All right. No deferral questions, and no, Jeremiah, don't ask me any questions. And how about law enforcement, like executives, deputy chiefs, that type? And everybody else, I assume, is just, not just, but rank and file, that type, trying to implement these things in their agencies. And I understand the GIVE program has an evidence-based track to it. So you all might be somewhat familiar with evidence-based policing. And again, this is the definition. I think you probably heard it in every presentation here. But one of the things I like to focus on isn't so much like the random control trials and stuff like that. I'm much more of an operational kind of guy, is the outcomes of police work. That's what we're focusing on. That's what's going to help us in our day-to-day decisions and moving forward there. And I also find it kind of odd that law enforcement is somewhat resistant to moving toward evidence-based when pretty much our whole system is based off us presenting evidence in court and being very evidence-based. Like we go to trial, we prep a case, we're looking for facts that we can prove our case. Yet we don't transfer that over to how we operate in system-wide. So here's another somewhat definition here, and this is where I really like to focus on because I think there's a huge community impact here with evidence-based policing. And I may say switching to evidence-based, I think we've largely been in a mindset of that's the way we've always done it, or the more traditional way of doing things that, well, it works for now, or maybe it does, or that's what we've always done. But some key words here, transparency and accountability. And I should back up a minute. So we did the leads agency self-assessment tool, and then the beginning of this year, our city council actually funded a external racial bias audit of the police department. And I've been lead on that, and the preliminary report is out now, so we've got a lot of good findings and a lot of recommendations from that. So that's where some of the things that I'm going to talk about today are if I reference the audit or something like that, that's what I'm talking about, where we've had discussions with them, and it really was eye-opening. We had done the self-assessment tool, and then they came in and were like, pretty much, yep, it was dead on. That's everything you need to work on. but we had to pay them a lot more money than a free downloadable form. But transparency and accountability. How many people to check this recommendation put all their policies online? Okay. Most agencies now have a majority of their policies online, but that doesn't really tell the community that you're following them, right? Like there's no evidence to say, hey, yeah, we're doing that. This is our policy, and we're very much in a trust me, right? And that's where I think we can really kind of make that turn with evidence-based policing is it gives us something tangible to take to the community. We can say, hey, here are the facts. Here's our policy. Here's how we prove that we're following it. And here's how we're accountable to you all now. So really just putting your policy out there, that's transparent, but we're missing that accountability part there. So I've had to explain evidence-based policing to not only officers and agency officials and those types of things, but to the community, because they're confused when we talk about this stuff and why are we going to spend money and that type of thing. But does your doctor use evidence-based practices? Well, I hope your doctor uses evidence-based practices, right? Like you want to go in there and you want to be told, hey, if you take this medicine, it's going to fix what ails you, that type of thing. But there's side effects, right? So your doctor has research that tells them if you take this treatment, then there's potential side effects. And we saw the 4 pillars yesterday of hotspot policing. It reduces crime. We've seen that. But are there side effects? Are there side effects to that? And again, this is where the communication aspect and walking in and talking with facts instead of feelings is critical to evidence-based policing. So one of the side effects that could come around from hotspot policing is that you stop a disproportionate number of people, right? A certain demographic gets stopped more frequently. Well, if that's a side effect of hotspot policing, then just like your doctor, did you have that conversation with the community ahead of time? Did you go to those community leaders and say, hey, here's what we know is going to happen. When we administer this treatment, whether it's an increased presence or it's targeted offenders, whatever the strategy that you're going to implement, we anticipate these side effects. And the community is more likely to be receptive to what we're doing because that communication tool is there. Right now, I feel like we are having a lot of discussion on community members coming to us going, well, this is how I feel. And right now, because we don't have that accountability, we don't have that evidence, we go, well, I don't feel the same way. And that's where we get in this back and forth of whose feelings are more important. Again, this is where the evidence-based side of things, you can walk into that meeting and go, I understand why you feel that way. Here's the numbers. Yes, and we talked about this was going to happen, and we bring you the information that says we're following our policies. Do you have that critical or tragic incident? And you go, we are doing this training. This is how we prove that we've been doing it. And so it's much more at an operational type level. On that operational level, who needs to be involved with evidence-based policing? This isn't just something that sits in the chief's office and they say, yep, we're doing evidence-based policing because we have this one thing and we have a policy that says we do evidence-based policing. It's, to me, much more about those informed discussions. And it's got to kind of fall in this balance here of being efficient and effective. Like we want to be efficient and effective. So we want to use the least amount of taxpayer dollars, our resources efficiently, and we want to be effective. We want it to work, right? And then we don't want to do any harm. And a lot of times that harm is just mitigated through communication. Like we need the people that we go into those communities, we need our officers to know that, hey, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing and this is why. Again, a conversation based off facts, not feeling. So I'm going to dive into this self-assessment tool. It's really broke down into 7 areas. And if you want to try to score along as we go, each area generally has a question and this is how the assessment spells out, has an assessment question. To what extent does your agency have reliable, accurate information on bottom-line outcomes? 10 being the highest, 1 being the lowest with no accurate information. So you can kind of just play along, if you will. I'm just going to take you through some of the key parts here. So I don't know if y'all can read that in the very back there, but these are bottom line outcomes. And there's the different numbers there are serious crime, serious offenders, safety and order in public places, traffic safety, fear of crime, quality service, use of force, not only in the use, but the authority fairly and effectively, bias-free policing, all that's kind of lumped in there together, and use of resources. So your financial resources, your overtime, controlling your costs there. So that's kind of the overall bottom line outcomes. And I think the word outcomes there is critical. These aren't typically outputs. These aren't things that you can say, okay, we had 15 serious crimes. That is a definite number that you can see there. But how do you judge fear of crime? Is anybody doing a survey that currently says, give us feedback on how safe you feel in your community? If these aren't really things that you can go, well, at least I can't. And again, we don't know. We have, in Charleston, we're largely a tourist area. We have 9 million people come in a year for tourism. I guess they would stop coming. I mean, do I use that as my outcome for my reliable, accurate information? So that bottom line outcomes there, if you're playing along, just give it a score of 1 to 10. How you feel there, and another good area there is your use of resources. Whether it's just overtime costs or, most agencies across the country are short with officers. How are you staffing your units? Is that in an effective way? But I think in a lot of agencies that's very siloed. So every patrol looks at their aspect, detectives look at their aspect, spec ops looks at theirs. But how are we tracking that, and are we able to get that bottom line outcome? So I'm not going to ask anybody to say, oh, we're terrible at that or anything like that, but just kind of think about that perspective. So measuring external conditions is the second portion here. And again, the reliability of your data here. One of the things that we've struggled with a lot, and just to go through there, crime, disorder, calls for service, gangs, parolee, probation information, traffic crashes, again, fear of crime, client satisfaction. For police work, client satisfaction, okay. Citizen complaints, public trust, citizen attitudes toward the police. Some of these things are a little more on the output side than the outcome side, but one of the things that we've struggled with is our calls for service. We have a consolidated dispatch for the entire county, and they want to control what data we can see on our calls for service. So it's reliable to the extent that we can get it. And does anybody, just from my own knowledge, because I might steal it from you later, does anybody have any way of collecting information on your client satisfaction?
No one's going to speak up, but there have been agencies that I'm aware of that have actually tried to do some things with follow-up based on police contacts, right? So, doing that through either text message or email, saying, hey, even for people who are arrested, how the officer treat you, things like that. But then also community surveys, measuring the amount, I guess you will, of community satisfaction or trust in the police. So,
right.
Things like that. I'm just aware of a couple of agencies that have done something like that.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that's very, I think, relevant. Those bottom three there, client satisfaction, citizen complaints, and public trust toward the police. Those are things that we should be monitoring because they have a definite impact that you might not find out about until a tragedy, right? So think about those areas and give yourself a score of 1 to 10 there. And again, this whole thing should only take 15, 20 minutes. I'm going a little more detail. Measuring internal conditions. So this is where really think about reliable, accurate information as I mention these topics, not how you personally feel the department does. because you're probably accurate for you, but not so much across everything else. So officer safety, assaults, injuries, accidents, most people probably do well at tracking that. But employee health, wellness, stress, attitudes toward the public, so officer attitudes toward the public, officer's attitude toward the agency, like, all right, officer knowledge, skill. Did somebody raise their hand? They wanted to say something about their department. Knowledge, skills, special talents, discipline, grievances, quality of applicants, characteristics of new hires, quality and effectiveness of training. So obviously that's a lot of stuff going on there, and there are a couple programs out there. I think the platform has from the Police Foundation started moving toward collecting a lot of that stuff, doing regular officer surveys to kind of judge some of these different areas. But we found out when we were going through the audit, they wanted to see the last couple years or last 5 years of our applicant pool. Well, that's all handled through city HR. And they said, well, we don't keep anybody that doesn't make it. And we're like, well, that's huge. You know, where's our data at to go back and look at why are we missing these people? So, you know, a lot of good questions there and a lot of important areas, especially a lot of these things have to do with officer retention. You know, if you're not aware of these things and monitoring these things, how are you keeping up with why people are leaving and why they'd be, or how to keep them here longer? So again, give yourself a 1 to 10. The next area is measuring performance. Now this one, I would say most agencies do well, or they have something, right? So arrests, citations, public contacts, vehicle stops, pedestrian stops, response times, crime clearance rates, judicial outcomes, use of force, pursuits, civil judgments, individual performance players, or performance appraisals, and then unit program measures. So does everybody in the room pretty much collect most of that? Like, those are pretty common areas and what we've largely used across the board. The only caution I'll throw out to that is how reliable and accurate is it? Right? Because it's one of those things, garbage in, garbage out. Does everybody do their performance appraisals the same way in your agency? If you were to do analysis on that, would you be able to use it? Would it actually tell you something? Or do you know going in, there's probably one of these areas, you know going in, well, I know how they do it over in this unit, I know how they do it in this unit. And that, well, they may not even have it over there, but is it going to give you that reliable and accurate? There'll be information, but how reliable and accurate is it? Again, that area is one of the big things that we found through going through our audit and several recommendations on that was that auditing processes to ensure the reliable information is making it in. That certain units didn't, you know, not intentionally and not with negligence, but they weren't missing a piece of the paperwork. You know, for instance, we have a juvenile risk assessment tool that we use, but quite frankly, unless you're a school resource officer, you might make 2 juvenile arrests in your entire career. Are you going to remember to do the 15 extra pieces of paperwork, or are you just going to give them back to mom, which we do 90% of the time? Well, actually 96% of the time, right? So like you're like, I didn't need to do those 15 pieces of paperwork to prove I'm going to give them back to mom. And you miss that paperwork, and thereby that data set, that information is no longer reliable. It's not accurate. So give yourself a score 1 to 10 there. Now, this question is a little bit different. It's still 1 to 10, but hopefully we don't make the analyst in the room run out screaming. But these are all analytical capacity. So the columns on the right there are no, some, and strong. So crime trends and patterns is the first topic. Trends and patterns in other incidents and issues like problem-solving analysis. Active offenders. Connections among offenders, so social networking analysis. Repeat call locations or hotspots. Allocation and deployment, workload analysis type information. Trends and patterns in client satisfaction and public trust. Trends and patterns in officer safety and employee health, wellness, and stress. Trends and patterns in employee grievances. trends in quality of applicants and new hires, trends and patterns in officer activity, whether that's arrests, citations, disparate impact in vehicle and pedestrian stops and searches, trends and patterns in use of force and pursuits, and trends and patterns in citizen complaints, civil suits, and judgments. That's 14 different areas there. Is there anybody that's like, yep, we got them all? We're knocking it out of the park? And if you do, I'll refer back to numbers 1 through 4. How reliable and accurate is that information? And y'all are probably going, man, this guy's got no good news. He's not bringing us anything, right? But the reality, I think, for law enforcement is that's kind of where we are. We can either stick our heads back in the sand and go, well, we'll continue to be here, or we kind of embrace it and let's try to make it move forward. To me, what this slide tells you, whether you're a 1 or a 10, is that as you're going through this, you've got to have a little bit of foresight to begin with the end in mind. What is the purpose to do this? This slide, or this portion of it, number 5, tells me I can't just think about the operational components of making an arrest. Like our systems are set up to be operational, right? That's what we did 10 years ago. We made sure everything was operational. We made sure collisions would be approved by DPS. We made sure our tickets would be accepted by the courts. We were making sure everything was functional and operational, and now we're going, oh, how do we use that now? And that's where, looking at a list like this, you go, okay, here's some of the questions we should be able to answer with our data. And that helps you kind of focus in as you start building out these systems or revising things or changing policies. So I touched on this one just a little bit. Again, it's got a different, still 1 to 10 range there, 10 being the best. To what extent does your agency systematically evaluate current practices and test new ones to make sure the agency is performing as effectively as possible? So current practices are regularly evaluated. Does everybody have a timeline, like every year, every 3 years, or every 5 years we review this? Or is y'all's typically, you evaluate it when somebody's disciplined underneath that and they say, well, I found a loophole, and then you're okay, that one's reevaluated, right? You met the reevaluation process, right? That's how it works. New initiatives are systematically tested is the second bullet point there. The agency has the internal capacity to evaluate and test current and new practices. And the last one there, the agency has reliable research partners to assist with evaluation and testing of current and new practices. So to me, those kind of build upon each other. But the first one, current practices are regularly evaluated. We have a policy for this. Is it working? Are we following it? And is it having the intent we created the policy for? One of the things that I use as a most basic to explain to officers and our command and everything else is we have a policy that says we have to turn in all of our incident reports by the end of our shift. All right, I would say most agencies probably have something similar. It might not be end of shift, but the end of that rotation or whatever. Why is that a policy? Right? I think we all inherently know it's to make sure the reports get in on a timely basis and we can investigate them properly and close them out and start working them. But is that policy being followed? It's pretty straightforward, right? Did you turn them in or not? And they're like, well, that's on the sergeant. I was like, okay, it's on the sergeant. Well, we found out in 2014, I think it was, that we were missing about 10% of our reports never made it in. Like, it's just a simple audit query that we built, and we're like, oh, we're missing 10% of our reports. Well, when you write 25,000 reports a year, now we're missing 2,500. Now, what we realize is most of the time they're just clerical mistakes. But you don't have to, everything doesn't have to be, career-ending, this huge, major issue, but if we don't even know if we're writing all of our reports, how do we know that we're effectively using force? Like, these things transfer across. So are your policies and your practices being regularly evaluated to make sure that, hey, the report got in? Our policy for that, here's why it's there. we're following it, and when it's not being done, we address it. So that's one of those kind of very simple, but can demonstrate, are you following your policies? Here's what we can take to the community and say, yep, here's all of your reports. Everything you made, everything you called us about and we filed a report on, here's what it is. We're not missing a single one, all right? And I think that will speak volumes if you transfer that across other things, like I said, use of force, stop rates, where you can actually prove why we have a policy, that it's being followed, and that it's having the intended impact. Officers are getting the reports in on time. So again, that one's got a lot fewer bullet points there, but give yourself a 1 to 10 if you feel like you're 10 if you're knocking all those out of the park. Now, this one is about using the evidence. So it's one thing to have all this data, it's one thing to have all the analysis, and it's a completely different animal to actually use it, right? So again, 10, your systematic utilization of best available evidence. So the question that you're going to answer here is, to what extent does your agency take into account the best available science and professional evidence in making decisions, policy, and practice? So I'm going to run you through these real quick. I told myself I wasn't going to read this whole thing to you, but it looks like it happened. The agency uses its own data and the results of its evaluation and testing to improve its practices. So using your own data. The agency scans professional policing knowledge base to identify best practices. Also scans policing and science knowledge base for evidence or new evidence about what works and what doesn't. Which, does everybody understand why those are two different things? Best practices aren't always research or evidence-based. So best practices probably means they haven't been sued yet using that practice. Evidence-based means there's some science behind it there. So the agency uses studies done in other places to improve its own practices, being in tune with what's going on as things change. And internal mechanisms such as planning and research unit or evidence-based policing committee has been set up to ensure that there's best available evidence is systematically used. And the last one there, the agency recognizes and rewards personnel who adhere to evidence-based policing principles and practices. That one's kind of tough, right? The last one, how do you give out awards for people that maybe aren't leading your team in arrests or leading your unit in tickets and those types of things, but maybe they're doing the things that work, right? And if we're not able to even pick that up on our own to use the evidence, how do you kind of further that in your agency? So give yourself a 1 to 10 on there. And then the last part's easy. You just add it all up. Now, these are not Charleston's numbers, we'll say. And one thing I'll mention here is if you did play along, you're getting one person's perspective. I would say, give it to your chief. Give it to your deputy chief. Give it to some of the patrol commanders. And just have them kind of fill it out on their own. You may have to walk them through it and explain to them what some of those things are. But have them go through it, and you're probably going to see a severe disconnect. Right? I assume every agency has, just like we do, the one guy that's like, nope, we did it that way when I started in 1980, and I said, well, that was before I was born. Like, I don't get it. Like, why are we still doing it that way? But that's the way it's always going to be as long as they're there, right? But give that to them and see where they fall, and then maybe average it out and see where it is. This thing is really going to tell you kind of where your priority should lie, right? So in my example, I gave my mock agency using evidence at a 2. Well, we can't really drive up that 2 until we get our reliable information, right? Like, you can't just go with, okay, we're going to use it. Yeah, it's garbage, but we're going to use it, right? Like that, you're going to move in the wrong direction there. So a lot of these things are intertwined and a lot more closely related than you first think. You're like, okay, internal, external, nothing to do with each other, right? Well, no. And especially that number 5 there, it's really based off of how great that information is on the first 4 there. So that's the assessment. And again, you got a 33. If you got a 70 and you're done, I mean, you're excused. You don't have to listen to me ramble on for anymore. But I would say once you start getting up there in that 8, 9, 10 range is when you may want to say, hey, somebody else that doesn't know us, come in and let me explain to you what we're doing. Because what we found in South Carolina for Charleston is a lot of people come to us and ask us how we're doing things because we are the largest agency. Which means if we're not looking outside of South Carolina, we probably aren't on the cutting edge of things because everybody's coming to us. So when I did this assessment for our agency, I sat in a room with the patrol captains, the analysis captain, and our operations deputy chief. And we've been doing CompStat for 10 years. They were all 8s and 9s, right? They were like, yeah, we're knocking it out of the park. We're good. We got this, we got this, we got this. And so I started asking questions like, but what about number 5 here? We're talking about analyzing data problems. What have we done with disparate stops? Oh, well, I mean, we're good. Right? So you can really hamper yourself if you're in that mindset and nobody's bringing in extra reports. So if you're the one that's been tasked with doing this, I would say, although Google is not research, go Google what some other agencies might be doing and take those reports in. And do we have anything that looks like this? Do we have anything that shows us this? Do we have anything that's going to help me explain this to a community better? And ask those questions and really push your agency forward. I think that is really one of the key things that's causing agencies to be, police hate change, period, right? And this is more or less saying, not only are we going to change and move to evidence-based, but evidence-based in itself means you constantly change. You're constantly reviewing, you're constantly changing. So what works this year might not work in 2 years. And I think that scares a lot of people, especially senior command, that are like, I want to know what the answer is, and I want that answer to be the same in 5, 10, 15, 30 years. So you listen to me explain how to use a form for well more than 20 minutes. But what's next, right? Where do we go from here? You've got your assessment. We've prioritized the list. A big, huge problem I see, and I expect it to be across the country here, is do your systems talk? You got field contacts, there's citations, there's dispositions, there's community out. Anybody measuring their community outreach? Is it working? I can tell you, in our audit, we got hit pretty hard. We feel like we do a lot in the community. I can tell you there's weeks where I spend more time at community events after work than I spend with my own family. And there's a lot of our officers in command that felt that. And we, our audit says that we have no substantive community engagement. Not need to improve, not you could do better, none. And we're like, man, that hurts. That hurts. Well, what we found is that everything we were doing, when the community was asked about it, they're like, well, yeah, they come out and they do movies with us and they cook hot dogs and they do this and they do that, but why? They're just doing it for the photo op. Whoa, that's not our intent. No, I met 3 people there that day. How do you document that? How do you have reliable data to go back and go, this program works, this program doesn't work, this is here? And one of the things we're working on is being more objective driven when we go to these things. Is it a recruiting event? Is it just an educational event? Is it just to get out and get to know people? Well, if it's just to get out and know people, we need to have a lot of people show up. So that's one of the things we're working on there for community outreach. I know Portland, Oregon's got several good things that they're doing out there with that, and we're trying to steal some of their stuff. But all these different systems, most of these things all fall in different systems for us. Does anybody have their RMS connected to their body-worn camera? You can actually, yeah. So we got all these different systems, and ours largely don't talk. And largely we can't even link them because there's no unique identifier across all the systems, because our dispatch has one set of IDs for us, and our records management system has another. Our use of force, we can make them the same, but they don't talk well. Some of our body-worn camera stuff's all in the cloud, and they're like, it's not possible. And we're like, oh. But we joked about this last night, that if we were making widgets, and this is how we count widgets, most of us would be out of a job. Like if that was our business and they want to know how well we're doing it, is it working? And if you really, really want to know how easy it is to pull all this information for just one case, go ask who handles your Freedom of Information Act. Do y'all have that in New York, where you have to disclose public records and that type of thing? But I can tell you, it drives our staff. We have 2 ladies that do that, and I think they have to have 6 or 7 different logins just to pull stuff for one case. You know, our solicitor's office, that's our prosecutors, we're like, just give them access to all the systems. And they're like, we're not logging into your dozen systems to pull your information for your agency. You know, these systems are, you know, not communicating well with each other, but it's one of those hurdles that we have to kind of move through. And I think as we've moved from law enforcement, we're very good at the case by case. We can go to a homicide and we can call that. We can go to this domestic and we can handle that. We can take a complaint on one of our officers and investigate that. And that's where our systems currently are. We're very good at managing that incident and making sure everything individually gets done. But where we're kind of behind the curve, especially for our agency, is moving that forward. How do you look at the whole department? How do you look at just a team? How do you look at the whole agency as it compares to agencies around us? So getting those systems to talk, and again, this is kind of that begin with the ending in mind. You know, what do you want to see, or what do your officers want to see? You know, do they want to see outputs or outcomes? There's a difference, right? Our traffic division, we just ran into we had a complaint and uncovered a can of worms, actually, but for the last 10, 15 years, we've been tracking outputs. How many tickets were written by our traffic unit? Their goal, if you look in the paper, on the policy, is to reduce collisions. They wrote a ton of tickets. We were watching the outputs. Ticket numbers, up. Ticket numbers, great. Maintain right where they need to be. Outcomes, collisions, steady track. And it was just kind of accepted. We just said, okay, well, no matter how many tickets we write, people are still going to get in wrecks. Well, we had a complaint come in, and now we've had to address it with multiple officers that no longer work for us. The output that we were watching was the number of tickets written, right? Officers were writing 1 ticket or none and giving them to the driver and then turning in 6, 7 tickets because their goal was to write the output, right? They were looking for that output. Did it have any impact on whether or not collisions were reduced? Well, we weren't tracking it, but I can tell you no. Writing somebody 7 tickets for a paper violation is not going to stop them from getting a collision tomorrow. But that's just one side of it. What do you want them? What do you want your officers? What do you want your commanders? What do you want them to focus on? There is, to some degree, some output monitoring that has to be done, but is that the overall goal? You got to set up outcomes with this data to push you in the right direction. And the big side to it is, what does your community want to see? What do they want to hear from you? If they come and say, hey, I had a complaint, and nothing was done with it, do they want to be able to go somewhere and see that? You know, that accountability piece and establishing that public trust, I kind of liken it to a bank statement, right? Like, I assume everybody in here has at least a couple dollars in a bank account somewhere, right? Some of you maybe more. Y'all make way more up here than we do, so y'all probably got way more than us. But everybody has their money in a bank, right? And everybody's good as long as you get a bank statement, or they say, hey, you can go online and check your account. And whether you reconcile your bank account or your bank statement, you generally know if I pull that up and it says, yep, you got $5 left, I probably got $5 left. My wife went shopping or whatever. But we're good with that, right? We trust our bank because they give us something tangible back, and we know we can go do it. So we as people are all okay with that. But what were to happen if our bank were to say, you know what? I just want you to trust us. We got your money. It's there. You spend it when you need to. You keep your own records. But, you know, every 5 years or so when there's an audit, we'll send you a bank statement. would anybody leave their money in the bank more than 24 hours, right? No, you're like, here's my last statement, pull it, let's get my money out because I don't trust you with my money. Am I the only crazy guy in the room that would think that, right? Like, nobody's going to trust the bank just to keep up with their money. But yet in law enforcement, that's largely where we are, right? Like, the community has an outcry. This is happening. And we say, no, it's not. Trust us. Well, how much better would that conversation be if we could actually go back and say, no, yes, it happens, or yes, the numbers are disproportional, or they're disparate for that, but here's why. Here's the context around that. Here's the numbers, and here's the facts, and we're going to work on it to do this, and here's the approach we're going to take to do it. So I just think that that's what the community and citizens are really expecting from us now is some level of accountability so they can trust us again. And they don't need to have that bank statement that's every week or every month, you know. But they want us to have some type of level of accountability. And I think where that scares a lot of agencies is we're not even sure where to go with it ourselves. You know, we're asking the same questions, and everybody's sitting here going, well, there's that one guy over here that does that. There's the unit over here that does this. And we don't know how to put that into context. So we kind of shy away from it. We might stick our heads back in the sand. And that's really where we've got to, like I said, embrace it. We are where we are. It is what it is right now. And we've got to take it and move it forward. So just a couple of websites here. If you're looking for this form and you want to take it or send it out, I have a draft version, which is a PDF. It's I like it better, but on Justice Clearinghouse website, they actually have the full thing. It's an Excel version, so it'll do the math for you if you don't have an analyst to do the math right there for you. George Mason University on their website, cebcp.org, has a lot of the what works, a lot of the stuff that's already been done, and the research. So you don't have to go out. Everything doesn't have to be an RCT or you reinventing the wheel here, but some of these things have already been proven to work, so it's just a matter of stealing it from somebody else or borrowing it or whatever PC word you want to say there. And I'll do another shameless plug for the ASCBP, because Stu made me. I'll blame him. Now I'm a member of that. We get a ton of research briefs, so they've broken it down from the 200-page research article to the good stuff, you know, the stuff that a chief or an operational commander may want to know that says, hey, if you spend, 2 hours every 12 days at this intersection, it's going to have an impact on traffic collisions. Well, that's huge, because I can now cover with one officer how many different intersections every 12 days. Those types of research articles is a great listserv that gets people talking in the same arena there. All of us aren't nerds, but that's kind of that blog post and that email group really has a lot of good information flying around on it. So with that, I don't know where I'm on time. Perfect. So I will open it up for questions if there's anything. Oh, of course. Jason, go ahead.
Second question for you. How do you reconcile the union pushback?
That's very easy in South Carolina because we don't have unions. Thank you for the softball. But having never dealt with unions, I would guess facts are better than feelings. I mean, are you talking about more on the officer wellness side of things and that type of thing, which is the feedback, or just in general?
Overall pushback and resistance. And I'm sure you've seen it through the market. How do you reconcile that?
Well, I think the newer officers are much more embracive of doing things that work. Like, they want to be efficient with their time. They want to come out and have an impact and see that it's working and move forward. It's a lot more of a systems type thing right now for us, and a culture of moving away from the way we've always done it. But anybody else? No? All right. That's all I have. Thank you.
Let me just break the mic also. I'll probably have one more.
So one of the things, that we actually promote through GIVE. And I know there are some agencies here that are not a part of GIVE, but we definitely promote evidence-based work. And to answer Jason's question, about unions, and that is a concern. That is I don't say it's a problem. I'm a union member. I mean, so but it is something that needs to be considered in the framework of this whole thing. I mean, we have agencies that couldn't send people here to this event because their union rules have certain limits on the amount of training days that they can go to, and this was considered training. So that is something that you definitely do need to consider. But I think, just like anything, first of all, implementing these things, just my experience with GIVE is, it takes some time. It's not like, okay, we're going to do, focus deterrence or, hotspot policing, and it just, goes right, smoothly right from the beginning. I remember a couple of years ago at the GIVE Symposium, a researcher, of course I picked the hardest name to say, but it was like Roger Przlewski, said something about that to implement one evidence-based strategy in ideal situations for one agency takes like 3 to 4 years for it to be sustained, over time. So, we're like, well, hold on, we're trying to do 4 in 17 counties with 71 agencies in less than ideal. Like, how long is GIVE going to take to kind of be effective or not? Like, to say it's effective or not? Like, my lifetime, probably. But those are the things, like, it's not just for all of you looking to do this work, I think, it's not like you just do this for 30 days and that's it. It takes some commitment. And I think that for me, my experience as a cop, in New York City, the proof is in the pudding, right? If what you're doing is making an impact and you see it, then you will buy into it, But it's also training. Like we do training, through GIVE here in New York on hotspots policing and focused deterrence and CEPTED and procedural justice, or now what we're calling principal policing. Stealing it from Stockton. So we do this, on a consistent basis, routinely to try to build up awareness. So I think that, but we also recognize that we can't do it all as a state agency, right? Like the locals have to be engaged in it. So we're trying to do even train the trainers. We're trying to do things with, George Mason. One of the sites you put up there, earlier was from George Mason. We did an online evidence-based policing 101. Anybody in this room take that? Yeah. So we did an evidence-based policing 101 online course last year. Actually, the first day of it was at the symposium last year, and then 8 weeks online. Then the last week was in Albany. We're going to be doing more of those. So we're trying to do things. I just want to bring some awareness to all of you. We're trying to do some things to promote it, to get some line-level people involved in it. And also at the same time try to get, the executive level support for it. I go back to our beginning days with Newburgh, and trying to implement the group violence intervention. Anybody from Newburgh here? No, they're here definitely, but not in this room. But I remember our commissioner telling them, because they were saying, well, this is going to take all these extra resources, and we don't have the money to do this extra thing. And Mike Green, our commissioner, said, listen, you're looking at it wrong. We think it's not a different way of doing it; it's the way to do it. We're not saying to do this in addition to what you're doing, but to change up the way that you actually address this issue using this type of evidence-based work. And they have wholeheartedly, not like night and day, or not like overnight, I should say, but like pretty quickly, adopted it and embraced it, and have sustained it over years, for now 6 years. So, but just to close out too with Jason, I just want to ask one question. So there's a lot of people in here who are not GIVE agencies and the idea is that they don't have a lot of experience implementing or doing evidence-based work. I'm assuming that's why you're here. I see a few of you that I recognize that are definitely doing some, though. But what would you say, the first step, if you're looking to do this work, what would your recommendation be right off the bat to start to do it?
Well, to back up just a little bit on what you were talking about, I think one of the things that's hard and takes a lot of energy for evidence-based policing is that there is no canned, like off the shelf you can just pull and say, all right, use this at your agency. Here's the template, go. Like everything's going to be dependent on your systems. It's going to be dependent on your personnel. It's going to be on your processes and how to do things to evaluate those things. And I think that's what makes it very difficult to just say, oh, I mean, because if there was a form that we could say, all right, download this app and it'll do it for you, then everybody would just go, okay, just follow this now. Everything will upload in. But it's not that cut and dry. It's very much very involved and it takes a lot of energy to keep that stuff moving. And you're talking about keeping a project going for 3 or 4 years. That's not an email once a week that says, okay, we're still doing it. Don't forget to do your EBP stuff. I think the first step is really having an honest look, and I think that's what the self-assessment tool does, is having an honest look about where you are, not where you think you are, but where you really are, and then it's going to all start back to how your systems are set up, you know, and then that's hard. I mean, we ourselves, like I said, we have 6 or 7 different systems to collect this information, but if we kind of just say, well, it's hard to retrain everybody on how to write a report. Well, if it's hard now, it's still going to be hard in 10 years, and we're still in the same spot. So it's one of those, you know, you've got to really get your data collection components set up. And I don't want to sound like everything's data. Some of those things are always going to be, you know, community driven. You're going to have to go out to the community and ask them how they're feeling. You're going to go out there and have to have those conversations. You're going to have those relationships. But it's going to really start there at the most basic level, you know, and I'll go back to are we doing all of our incident reports? Is everything making it into the system? And that fundamental level, if you're not able to answer that, there's no reason to start doing regression to the mean analysis or something like that to prove at some point if you don't have the base foundational information there.
That's good. All right, so we're out of time for now, but once again, I just want to remind you, all of you that, if you'd like to get some more information, first of all, I was thinking it would be wise of us to send out the actual PDF self-assessment tool. So we will do that. Also, we are sending out, I know some of you in the back, maybe some of the slides in here and other places aren't that visible. We are going to send out a PDF version of all of the PowerPoint slides. We do that every year. So we'll be doing that probably early next week for all of our presentations. But if you'd also like to get some more information from Lieutenant Bruder, you could certainly see him. We have room 107, kind of as a side room to do some more kind of one-on-one talks if you'd like to. Obviously, just set that up with him. For right now, though, we're going to go on a 15-minute break. I think we start up at 9:45. There is coffee and some light snacks in the convention center, so feel free to help yourself. And let's give a round of applause to Lieutenant Bruder.